So I guess I don't need the introduction because this was already pretty great. I'll just mention that we are hiring JavaScript, PHP designers, pretty much every role we have. And I worked on kind of a few projects for big corporations, small startups. And I'm saying this because one of the things that I found repeating over and over, and in a sense even more since I started doing startup advisorship, was that more often than not, there was a lack of focus. So this means that the first thing was to understand what we mean with focus, because there are very different levels of that. So in a sense, the usual problem there is that on one side, you find people that are working on something and say, yeah, of course, we know what we are doing. We know, don't even ask. Some people can get really angry when you ask that kind of question. And on the other side, you find individuals that sometimes they say, well, today I didn't do much, I was so unfocused, I kept distracting with stuff. And both of these things are actually both sides and both refer as focus. And that's why I'm starting here, because focus can really be the difference between knowing where you're headed, knowing your destination, and being lost in the process. Or at the same time is really, in the end, the difference of done and not done. And this is something we probably have lived, each one of us, at least once in our professional career, having that day that really didn't work, or that week, or even longer sometimes. So focus can be defined in very different ways, but since I'm trying to bring together very different aspects here, I'd like to define this as, in this kind of strange way. So it's a gravitational point where everything converges to. And I'm using this definition because on one side, it highlights three different, very interesting aspects of focus that are not always clear in the mind of people. So one thing which is usually clear is the focus itself. So there is a center point. There is that moment, that thing, that knowledge, that goal that you are headed to. Okay, that's clear. That's pretty much the general definition of focus. But then the other thing is that there are forces. So focus implies that there is an actor, there is someone, there is a team, a person, or a company that is heading to that. So there are forces at play that brings to that central point. And the last bit is the most subtle one, which is time, which is patience. Exactly because we are not talking in abstract, exactly because we are talking about forces, if you drop an object, gravity will bring you to the floor, but it takes some time. And unfortunately, most of the things we do, even more professionally, even more for huge companies, require time, and so require patience, and require strategies to get there over time. And we're going to touch all these points today. The thing is, the first thing to understand is that focus is these three things, but the thing implied is clarity. So reaching first that moment of clarity, and then you put clarity in motion, and you get focus. And you get to this second instance when you start actually doing and converging to that moment of clarity. We are just saying that things sometimes break. So why is it hard to keep focus? The big thing here is fear itself, but even more is a kind of comfort. Because we don't want to upset, we are comfortable in don't creating, don't stir it up, don't challenge other. If you're working in a team, of course, you try to play well with the team, unless you like actually causing trouble, but that's a different discussion. But even toward yourself, sometimes you don't ask the difficult question why you're doing something, because it's difficult. It's truly difficult. So we try on one side to avoid frustration for ourselves. So we don't do that because sometimes it's frustrating. Acknowledging that we spent 2 weeks' time on the wrong thing is very frustrating, even more if there is money involved. And the same thing is in a company. You try to avoid conflict. You try to play along because you have a common goal. This takes us to focus itself. So I've broke focus into 6 things. And the top one is the most abstract one, which is vision. And vision is very difficult to define, so I usually like to start with the Simon Sinek, start with why. It was a great video from TED. And if you haven't seen it, the concept there was around 3 different things. And he was saying that most of the company focus on what we're building, so the big circle. Some companies focus on the how we're building it. And very few companies actually focus on the why we're building it, why we're doing what we are doing. However, this is also the things that reaps the biggest benefits. Because if you have that long-term vision, if you nail and you understand, and that why is at the center of everything you do, then your company, your team, is likely to be very different. Because everything else, it becomes a consequence of that central point, of the central why, that understanding. And in the end, Simon tells this story in a very blunt way, a very clear way. If Dr. King said, I have a plan, it's pretty much unlikely that anyone followed him. But he had a dream. And that was a very precise dream, very clear. And from that dream, everything else came. So you need to ask yourself really, do you want to know your own why? And you're trying to understand the why of the company, the team, or the group of people you're working with. Because this can be a difference like night and day. Asking that question. And this is even more true when you are in an agency relationship, because the earlier you are able to ask this question, the easiest everything else you do in your job becomes. So yeah, clarify with everyone involved and find always that why. I mean, as a designer, there is even the joke, how many designers does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is, why does it have to be a light bulb? Because that's what we do. And we should do this actually more often. So the second aspect of focus is one level below. So we started with very abstract. We're moving down. And this is goal clarity. Vision is, as we said, as we've seen, is like a dream. It's a very abstract thing, a very end. It's on the horizon. Goal starts getting a little more pragmatic. And the problem here, and Dilbert, as usual, is able to express this very well. And the usual manager or even the CEO that comes back to you and say, these are the 25 things you need to take care of this year. Okay, I have no idea how to prioritize that. 25 is really not focusing on anything. But there is at least one positive side, which is at least he tried. Because this is the opposite situation, when it's assumed that everyone knows. We know what you're doing, right? We're 1,000 people in this company. Of course we know what you're doing. That's often not the case. Again, often you walk into a meeting room and you discover that they have actually no clue, and they probably get very angry if you tell them. So the advice here is really, sounds simplistic in a sense, because it's really set one goal. Of course, if you are a huge company, you can maybe do 2 or 3, but it's really one goal. There are big stories about how big companies like Facebook, for example, are focusing on one single growth metric in the early years. Of course, it changed over time. But the early years, there was one metric, and it was growth about the number of friends you had. And that was the only thing they cared about for a long time. And that took them where they are now. But the other interesting bit is that sometimes, even when this is done, Then they say, okay, yeah, of course, I set the goal. It was a great meeting in January. Everyone agreed. And now we're in June, and nobody did anything about it. And the problem with goals is that they need to keep iterating over and over. You need to keep repeating that. And sometimes it's not really just about saying the goal. It's it's demonstrating that you're actually acting along the goals. It's the usual thing, like you say something and then you act differently, then you're sending the wrong message. But of course, if you said you say something and you put where you said the money on it, then, well, okay, then it means something. It means that we are all saying that. And these are all communication. These are all signals that the company, the team, the organization sends to everyone inside the company, first and foremost. So this second level of focus is really just about set a goal, communicate it over and over, over and over and over. That's how you make the difference at this level. And then we have one level down again. We start moving to the product, and we start talking about focusing on the users. And this is interesting because it's nothing new again. So if you talk, for example, with Alan Cooper, he expresses, Alan Cooper is the inventor of personas and one of the greatest designers we have. And what he was saying is that, well, even in a team, sometimes even an individual doesn't know clearly which user he's talking about or she's talking about. Now, let's assume that even that one person is very clear about that. Okay, so for example, we are building an application for commuters. Great, commuters, right? Everyone knows who a commuter is. Of course, but then the other person in the team that commutes, yes, but in a very different way. For the other person, a commuter is an entirely different person. Yeah, of course, they still take public transport and take some time to get to work and whatever. But the idea of the user there, it's slightly different. And of course, you add a third person, a fourth person, a big team, and everyone starts having a slightly different idea of which user are we talking about. And the fascinating thing is that everyone believes that he's talking about exactly the same person. So clarifying that is, again, the first step leading to focus and to clarity and to actually build a product for someone. And as a user, what is interesting here is that, again, this is a bit about personas, so there is a lot written on this topic, but in the end, we're talking about three things. What this person is doing, what is the goal, and again, not surprisingly, why? Why they're trying to achieve what they're trying to achieve. And of course, Alan Cooper tells us another bit. Of course, he studied this topic for many, many years. And what he was saying is that there is another interesting thing that is counterintuitive, which is designing a product for a large population doesn't mean designing a product for everyone. It's actually way, way more effective to do this for one person. And in a sense, the reason is simpler, because when you start building for multiple people, you start building something that is here in the middle. For everyone, it's a kind of okay product. Doesn't really do everything I want to do. It's okay, I guess. But we think that now there are three kinds of people and all of them enjoy that, so I guess it's okay. And a lot of companies work in this way. But what has been proven over time is that actually, if you build a product for one single type of user, very clear as possible, understanding goals, understanding behaviors, understanding whys, you're actually, this person is going to be an enthusiast. He's going to enjoy your product so much that he's going to talk about it to everyone he knows, even if it doesn't matter. And even more, it also means that you're covering, of course, a large set of features, but all for this person, but it's also more likely that other people, even if it doesn't match really, they're still useful to them. So you're still building a product, in a sense, for everyone, even if you focus on just one person. So the message at this level of focus is focus on one type of user. With the techniques you prefer, you can take personas, you can take jobs to be done, you can take any technique you want to do research on that. But focus on just one person and understand very clearly across the team, across the company, what are their behavior, what are the goals, and their whys. Then down another level. Once we nailed all these 3 layers of focus, a level down is about pragmatism. It's say, okay, now we have product, we have the user, we're very clear about that. How do we build that? Well, this is a quote I really enjoy from Steve Jobs because it shifts the focus. Sometimes you think about that building something for someone is about building features for them, so it's seen in a positive way. But at the same time, it's a matter of the things you say no to. And it's difficult because if something is entirely different from what you were building, that's easy. But then there are things that actually make sense. And so it's more difficult to say no if something, it's kind of okay. So that's where the difficulty of saying no steps in, where focus starts getting more difficult. The thing is, even at this level, it's possible to build stuff without focus. And a lot of people, sometimes when I speak about this, they say, yeah, but we already solved that. We're using Scrum, we're using Kanban, maybe in XP, we're using whatever techniques or management, team management, project management methodology we're using, invented in-house, doesn't matter. And I think that's solved. You see, we have a list of features, and it's going great, and we're going to build the next milestone, and so that's good. Not really, because still, this is just a little small feature. There is nothing inherently inside any of these methodologies that assures you that you're working on the right thing. So still, you need to focus in some way on this. And one trick I found very effective is creating milestones. Now, the terminology, you may change it because, of course, I know that milestone can be used in specific project management methodologies, but the idea is that a milestone can be just one major user valuable feature. It's something that a user will appreciate and will perceive as a definite improvement on what was before. And then, of course, a usual set of small improvement features. And this then applies and shifts to whichever project management or team management methodology you're using. You're using Scrum, that's great. Just focus on that first, and then you shift to the second level. While discussing, for example, with some teams, we started using the idea of epic stories in a similar way, try to frame this in a proper way. And this really helps, because now everyone knows exactly what is going to be built, and then there is a process below that helps building it. So that's the best possible scenario. And in a way to think about this is to think that milestone, everyone knows about minimal viable products. So a way to think about this is thinking as a minimal viable feature. So you're adding something, a hypothesis, or something very small, the smallest thing you can build in that single milestone that deliver value to the user. This is very, very useful. And that's exactly, for example, what we do. So as mentioned initially, we are an entirely distributed team. So my team is across US, Europe, and right now one moved to Bali for a few months. Good choice. But still, exactly because organizing together and aligning all these kind of vision, focus, and goals, we meet together. And this time was a few months ago in Vienna, and what we are doing here is exactly listing all the milestones that each one of us had in their mind And then we sorted it out. We agreed, we started to prioritize them. And as you can see in the background here, we were discussing about what problems the user had and what goals the user were trying to achieve. So we started the discussion about milestone first, focusing on users. So the advice here, again, could be, now the milestone is a trick I usually suggest because I found it working really well, but it's not universal, of course. I'm sure that different teams behave in different ways, so just take that verbatim if you like, or just as an inspiration for you. And the other trick is really to keep this milestone fluid. So since that meeting, I've just shown you the photo, we actually shuffled a few milestones around, and one milestone that actually seemed very hard was so easy that was done in 3 days. Apparently someone else built the feature before and we didn't know. So we just compressed it into another, and that was it. We kept it fluid because in the end, milestones, similarly to the layers above of focus, it's also very useful to communicate to the entire company what we are building, when we're building, and how we're building it. So keeping them fluid is not a problem as long as it's communicated. Another level down. This is getting personal. So we shifted for the entire company, to users, to team, and now to us, to the individual people. Focus here is about attention. And how many of you know the concept of flow? Okay, a good amount. I will try to pronounce his name. So the concept of flow comes from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Apparently, over the years, I managed just once to type the name in Google properly. And the idea is that it's a mix between the level of skill you have and the kind of challenge you're tackling. And here means that when you're very beginning, you have very little skill, so you need small challenges, and you get into this blue area, which is the moment of focus, the moment of flow, the moment where you are so concentrated on what you're doing that even if anything happens around you, you could ignore that and nothing would happen because you're so much into it and it's so good, you feel well, you're building something. The problem is that growing the level of skill you have, you need also bigger challenges to tackle it because otherwise you get bored, or of course the challenge is so big that you may get anxious. So that's the sweet spot you need to try to achieve. And that's a really good way to obtain that. But can be maybe a little too abstract. I mean, it's useful to understand that you need to tackle different challenges, growing your skills and everything. But of course, that's not everything. Now, this video, it's interesting because this is about a professional Street Fighter player. And the dot you see here in the middle is where the player is focusing the attention. And it's interesting because this professional player isn't focusing on themselves, nor is focusing on the other person. They're focusing right in the middle. They're focusing on the action, the movement that is happening between the two. And so this tells us that sometimes it's just a matter of where our attention shifts and how we are dealing with that. So sometimes we shouldn't try to focus too much on one thing. We should start to get in a sense, the big picture. Because here what he is trying to get is the big picture of what's happening. And this is, of course, demonstrated by research and paper. But one interesting aspect that I found underestimated a lot into the usual advice you find on self-help or all the efficiency on how to become productive that you find online, books and articles, is connected with, in a sense, with the same concept that we've seen into the flow idea. So, and this specific paper mentioned this because he's saying that attention, the ability to keep attention on somewhere, on some aspect of what you're doing, it's actually not all about the external disturbing stimuli that come, nor is always internally generated. It all depends on the balance between your internal motivation, so I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and the external stimuli. So this tells us that if I'm doing something that I enjoy doing, or it's a challenge, or it's something for any reason interesting for me, it means that I have an energy coming from the inside. And so the outside, there may be, again, you may be even get into flow, but without getting there, it means that external stimuli, it doesn't really matter to tune them down, because your motivation is really high. At the same time, if you're doing something that is probably boring or tedious, then even the smallest input from the outside will distract you. And so again, it brings you in a more nuanced vision of how you can reach your own attention and focus when you're doing work, because it tells you that you need to shift maybe even the environment, maybe even the office where you're working to, depending on the kind of stuff you're doing, or even maybe the mood you are in that specific day. So that balance isn't a fixed thing. You want to resolve that, creating your perfect working environment, because this tells us that that ideal environment shifts over time and changes, and it's balanced in very different ways. In the end, there are some people, of course, that really enjoy working from coffee shops, for example. So at this level, the advice is dual. So depending on what you're doing, you need to increase your motivation or reducing external interruption. And you can achieve a balance between these two elements. And now we get to the lowest level. So even more internally in ourselves. A matter of focus is a matter of reaching a form of inner calm. How many of you know the terms mindfulness? A good amount. So the idea of mindfulness is a scientific approach that blends together all the things about meditation and traditional things, but validated with the neuroscience and research on the topic. And the thing is, one thing that was discovered, this was a study a few years ago at a Mind Life Symposium in Berlin. And a researcher explained a very interesting model. And they were saying that when we work, even when we don't work actually, we have all this buzzing of thoughts around us, and we start thinking, oh, wait a minute, I need to do this today, and then, oh yeah, tomorrow, oh, that client, but come on. Oh, wait a minute, I have to go and buy some groceries for later. And all these thoughts come into your mind, and you keep swinging around one after the other. And of course, in the end, you're likely to not do very much, because you keep shifting inside this mental state. Now, of course, this can be more or less dramatic, but the idea then is you get a moment when you say, wait a minute, what am I thinking about? Why am I thinking about all these things? And so you have that hey moment, in a sense, that when you realize what your mind was doing. And what is apparent was this, in a sense, discovered, is that hey moment, it's something that meditation, for example, but other techniques are able to train. So it's a skill. So you can start training yourself, acknowledging that when this kind of circle of thoughts happen, you can start acknowledging, breaking it apart, and starting to refocus yourself. And when it happens again, you break it again. And the first time you try, it probably happens once in a day, and maybe the second time happened twice. And over time, you recognize that you're actually getting better and better to break the train of thoughts and being able to focus even more. And of course, this can be frustrating. And another interesting aspect of this, John Cleese is one of the Monty Python. What was interesting is that he did also a lot of studies on creativity. And one thing that he discovered interviewing passionate and great creatives from very different fields, from architects to stand-up comedians, is this discovery that, you know, that moment when you delay something, and suddenly it's too late and you rush in the end, and you stress yourself because actually you waited too long. Actually, what was discovered here is that that thing, you shouldn't feel too bad about it. Because, yeah, sometimes you probably can get a little better, but that's a matter of dealing with your day-to-day work. But on the other side, what he discovered is that the best creative people were the people, not just creative in the sense of creative, but also finding the best solution possible, were the people that were able to tolerate the frustration of not having immediately the solution, or maybe having a solution but not settling on that immediately, and waiting until the very last moment when they had to do it because there was no more time. And that led to the best possible outcomes. And of course, to do this, there were a lot of coping mechanisms and techniques you can embrace. And maybe we don't even need to do meditation about that, but every one of us knows probably about a great walk in the park, or even a great shower, where suddenly you got the solution to the problem. And these things work because, again, great paper, they actually discovered that it's a thing. It's actually how our brain works. We need that breathing space that allows our brain to expand, connect different things, don't think about it, and then you find the best solution because you are broader than that. You allowed your mind to space. Of course, sometimes this is not super useful. You may not have a shower in the office. So, of course, you need to find different ways to find that moment. The only thing here is that it actually doesn't work if you try to force it. So if you say, yeah, I'm going to have a great walk, and your brain starts thinking, yeah, so I can think 10 more minutes about it. No, that doesn't work, of course. So that's probably the most difficult thing about it. And that's probably why it works better under the shower, because there is no possible way that you can do something while you're wet and under the water. But it works. And that's something you can start building into your routine and into your work itself. And maybe if you have a manager that really doesn't get it, you probably need to find ways around it. But it works and is scientifically proven. So the two advices for this level are: you need to train to break the train of thoughts. That's a skill. You can learn it. And find true free space when you allow yourself to wander. You allow yourself to take a break, a real break, not doing anything, and then allowing you to come out with the best solution. So these are the 6 elements of focus I wanted to introduce you today. As you've seen, they are very, very broadly sparse, but can be broken up into 3 big chunks, because the top one is about thinking. So everyone in the company, in a big group of people, agrees and is together around the vision and around the goal. And the second level down is, in a sense, design or management, if you want to talk about in that way, which is about user and focusing on the work and day-to-day, in a sense, inside a team. And the third big cluster is about you personally. Ways and techniques to get a better attention and reach moments of your inner calm when you can allow yourself to find the focus and the best possible solutions. I usually close with this quote by Bruno Munari as an incentive to strive for simplicity. And that's all I got for today. Thank you very much.